Now let's go back to the file manager, open that config file again, and I'll go down and this time, since I know that my database name and username are correct, I'll change my password and click Save Changes. And then go back and look at my blog again. Refresh. I'm getting the same error message, error establishing a database connection. I know my database name's correct, I know my user is correct, but I have a error in establishing a connection. So how can I troubleshoot this to eliminate the password? Well, I'll go back to my control panel. I'll scroll down to look at my databases again under the MySQL databases, and I can see here that my database and my user, but there's no way that I'm aware of that I can actually look now and see what the password is for that user. So I'm not going to be able to verify whether the password is the problem or not. I know that my database is correct, I know my user is correct, but if I'm unsure of that password, what I can do through the control panel here, and you may be able to do the same thing in your control panel even if you don't have cPanel, is I can go down and create a new user and add the new user to the database. So I'll come here under Add New User and just pick another one. So we'll call this Figaro1. I'll generate a password so that it's a good strong password. Copy the password that's going to be assigned to the user Figaro1 and create that user. User's created. I'll go back and then go down and add the user Figaro1 to the database I'm using for my WordPress blog. So I'll click Add, give that user all privileges, make changes, go back. Now I can see that my Figaro1 user has also been added to the blog. Now I could remove Figaro if I wanted, and it's probably a good idea to do that unless you have a reason for having more than one user on a database. So I'll just click the X here to remove my old user from the database. Click Yes. So now I've just added a new user to my database, so I know the username and I know the password both. So then I can go back to my file manager, edit the config file, change my user, my DB user, to Figaro1, and then go down and put in the password that I know is correct for Figaro1, and then save changes. So now if I go back, if I did everything correctly and the password was causing the problem, when I go to my blog and refresh, then it should come back up. So with those techniques, I've troubleshot the database name, the user, and the password. If you do all those things and you still cannot connect a database, then the last thing to do is to check that DB connect. So let's go back again to WP config, and I'll click Edit. Now, as it says in your config file when you're initially setting up, most of the time localhost will be your host name, your DB connect. But it's getting to the point to where a lot of hosts are not allowing that. Some that I know, or one that I know that doesn't allow it, for example, is GoDaddy. If you're hosting on GoDaddy, you're not going to be able to use localhost. You're going to have something different to put in there. So let me just make localhost something else and show you what happens. Click Save Changes. So now I have the incorrect DB host in my config file. Go back to my blog and I get the same error message. So you can see here, any one of those 4 items will cause this error in establishing a database connection. You have to make sure that all 4 are correct. So we'll go back to my WP config file, edit, and I'm going to fix this by saying localhost. Now again, if you're on a server, if you're with a provider that doesn't allow localhost, then you need to find out from your provider somewhere what you do need to put in here. Sometimes that information will be made available to you in your control panel where you create or edit your databases. Sometimes you may have to get that information from your hosting provider. Instead of localhost, it could be that you need to put an IP address in here, or it could be that you have a longer address in here like database1 dot hostname dot something else. So it could be virtually anything that goes into your DB host here, your connect information. So if you're certain that these 3 things are correct, then chances are your problem is going to be in this DB host. And one of these 4 things is going to be causing the problem if you have a problem with connecting. I change it back to localhost, hit Save Changes, and then when I go back and refresh, now I can see my blog again. Now, let me just, while I'm here, let me show you a couple of other things that you could run into with problems. Let's go back to our file manager, look at the WP config file, and click Edit. Now, one other thing that you could run into, a problem when you're moving databases and things such as that, or moving hosts or whatever, is that on down you're going to have a table prefix for your database. Now, if the table prefix is incorrect in your WP config file, you're going to get a different error than you would get if any of these other four were incorrect. If any of these are incorrect, we know you're going to get that error, cannot connect to database. If the prefix is incorrect, let me just change this to XQ, anything, it doesn't really matter, and hit Save Changes. Then if you go back to your blog and look at it and hit refresh, now it's going to recognize that the database is there, but it's not going to recognize that your blog is set up, and it's going to prompt you to set up your blog again. And if you go through these screens and fill this out, then what you're really doing is setting up a brand new, fresh, empty blog, because it will create a second set of tables in your database with that prefix that's in your config file. So that's a different error here than the other ones, because it can find the database, it just can't find the tables in that database that belongs to your blog. So hopefully this short tutorial sort of overview gives you an idea of what to look for and how to do some basic troubleshooting if you get that error, cannot connect to database, to see whether it's your database name, your username, your user password, or the database connect information. I can almost guarantee you if you get that error, it's going to be one of those four items in your WP config file that is incorrect. So that's where you need to start to troubleshoot and narrow down the problem.